Hello, everyone, and welcome to the round three recap of Ottawa Winter Open. So, in the first two rounds, I got two wins. One of them was pretty smooth in round one, and in round two, I had a pretty hard fought win where I got lucky with my opponent blundering a full piece. But in round three, I was up against a tougher challenge. I was facing my Iranian compatriot, Amir Bahmani. His rating was pretty close to me. I was like 20, 30 points higher rated than him. But aside from him being Iranian, we have a lot of history previously playing against each other. So just to let you guys know, you're in the same age. And when I was like under eight, I was always like competing to become the Iranian champion. I was one of the best players in the country. And I remember in the last year that I played the under 8 Iranian championship, I finished in the second place, and Amir finished in the first place. He won the tournament, and I finished second. So we had like this very tight and close rivalry in that tournament, where we drew our game against each other, and he actually ended up winning the tournament by half a point more than me. Then when we got to under 10, I remember last round of the under 10 championship, I had the black pieces against him, and I managed to win a very nice game to win the tournament on board one. So we had all these close rivalries when we were under 8, under 10. We were always competing, fighting against each other to be the top player in Iran, in our previous country. So now, after more than 15 years, he came to Canada, I came to Canada, and again, we are facing each other in a big, big battle. Top board, 2 out of 2, fighting to get to the top of the leaderboard and try to win the tournament. Big, big game, definitely for both of us. And I was really ready and motivated to play a good game against him. I really wanted to go there and have a fight and try to win the game. And I can tell you guys right now, it was one hell of a fight. It was one of the longest games that I played in my life. So before the game, I looked at his games and I saw that he still plays e4, e5. I remember he used to play the same thing all the time when he was a child and up until now. And I know for a fact that someone who plays e4, e5 almost all their life, they know the structures in Italian and Roy Lopez. They know these structures really well. They just have way too much experience in those structures. And going into that, it's going to be a little bit risky because, of course, I'm going to be much less experienced than him in the upcoming structures. So I decided to start the game with d4 to avoid e4, e5. And he played knight f6. And this time, instead of the London system, which I employed in round one, I decided to go with c4. And the reason I picked up this line was that I saw that recently he's been playing Queen's Indian defense, which is a very solid system. But the fact is, with the black pieces, I also played Queen's Indian for a very long time. So I know black's ideas, and I also know which lines are the most annoying against the Queen's Indian. So I decided to give it a shot and play against his Queen's Indian setup. I played knight f3, played b6, and I decided to go with g3. There's also, of course, a3, which is called the Petrosian variation, stopping bishop e4 and preparing knight c3. But I decided to go with the g3 setup, bishop b7. Of course, there's also bishop a6, which I play sometimes myself. But I knew that he's probably going to go down this line. We both castled, and now I played knight c3. And this is the starting position of the main line. And here, the main move is to play knight to e4. The thing is, white really wants to go queen c2 and prepare e4. And if white can achieve that, white is going to have a very big and nice center. And the other point is, if black ever goes c5, white always has these ideas with d5, locking this bishop on b7 and getting even more control over the center. So knight e4 is actually the top move in theory. And my idea was to go bishop d2. And the idea of bishop d2 is that I defend my knight. So if he takes, I'm going to take with a bishop. And here black has many, many moves. Black has f5, black has bishop f6, d6, d5, knight takes d2. All of them are pretty much playable. I had a little bit of preparation against all of them, which I'm not going to reveal in this video. But that was my plan in the game in case he had gone knight to e4. So he played d5, which is the second most common move. But the thing is, after c takes d5, now black is facing a kind of an issue. If black takes with the e-pawn, then the bishop on b7 is going to be a little bit locked in, and it's going to be suboptimal here on b7. So my opponent decided to take with a knight. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now queen c2. And this was the last move I played being in preparation. And my idea is simply to go e4 and grab the center. So in this position, my opponent played a move which I didn't check before the game. He played knight a6, which was a pretty interesting move. His idea is to maybe prepare c5 and also get ready to play knight b4 and kick my queen from c2. Before the game, I just checked very briefly what happens if he goes c5, because I was like, what if he just tries to liquidate everything in the center? The thing is, I will take on c5, and if he takes with a b pawn, he's going to have this long-term weakness on c5, which I can press for the rest of the game. But my main question was, what if he takes with a bishop? Looks like these two bishops are very strong in the middle of the board. But the problem is now the king is a little bit weak on the king side. I can go knight g5, threatening checkmate on h7. He's going to go g6. Now I play knight e4, hitting the bishop on c5. He's going to go bishop e7 back. Now I play bishop h6, exploiting all these weak dark squares in his position. Now remember before the game, I just checked this brief but kind of forcing line where he has to save the rook. I go queen c3, threatening mate on g7. He can't play here because knight f6 is in the air. So he has to go f6. It's already looking a little bit ugly, but then I saw I can even go rook a d1. Now a move like knight d7, which is pretty normal, leads to a very nice exchange sacrifice. I sacrifice on d5, and after takes, I play this very nice move, knight to g5. So now if he takes, bishop takes d5 is actually checkmate. Very beautiful checkmate with queen and two bishops. Oh, I also have queen g7, by the way. So he has to go knight e5 to block the diagonal and also defend the d5 pawn, but now I have this nice shot, knight e6, and then queen b3, with bishop takes d5 coming next, and this weak king on g8. Black is still in deep, deep trouble. Anyways, so I checked what happens after c5, but my opponent played knight a6, and I was out of prep. Of course, I played the normal move e4, and now he plays knight to b4. Here was the main moment, the first main moment that I started thinking a lot. I knew I have two good squares for my queen to keep defending the e4 pawn. I had queen e2 and I had queen b1. So naturally, queen e2 is a better square. Like the queen is much more active on e2. But the problem with queen e2 is that I saw that if I go queen e2, he has this option of taking this pawn on a2. So initially, I was happy. I was like, if he takes on a2 with a bishop, I'm going to go bishop d2, threatening to take the knight, and then take the bishop on a2. And initially, I was like, he has to save the bishop, but then I'm going to go rook a3, hitting the bishop. And this bishop is almost trapped. If he goes bishop c2, for instance, which is the only square, now I can actually go for this, just take on b4 and take the bishop. And this position, I was pretty sure it's amazing for me because I have knight and bishop versus rook and a pawn. With all these weak squares on c6 and strong bishop on g2, I was 100% sure that this position is good for me. But then I saw that after bishop e2, he has this nice move a5. And now he's guarding the knight. So if I take a b4, now the bishop is guarded with a rook. And I was like, if I take it easy and he goes bishop b3, he can always defend it with a4 as well. And then he's going to get a very nice bishop on b3 as well. So I rejected this line. And then I started thinking, what if I go b3? What if I sacrifice another pawn to try and trap... Oh, sorry. What if I sacrifice another pawn to try and trap this bishop? So my idea was that if he takes, I go rook a3. And after bishop c2, I play knight e1. Now the bishop is trapped on c2. But then I saw this crazy line where he takes on d4, knight takes c2, knight takes c2, queen takes c2, bishop takes a3, bishop takes a3. And this position, I wasn't sure about. Like compared to the other position that I showed you, this time black has 3 connected passers on the queen side. I actually didn't like this, even though bishop pair is actually very strong, and I'm a big, big fan of bishop pair. I wasn't sure going into this with all these pawns coming down the board eventually. And in fact, computer thinks this is equal. But in the game, I was a little bit hesitant to go for it. So anyways, after some think, I decided to play queen to b1. Decided to play queen b1 so that I can easily keep this a2 pawn intact. And I saw that if he goes bishop c4, I can always go rook d1, so that my queen is not going to get trapped or anything on b1. And here white is definitely fine. My opponent didn't go with bishop c4, played a more normal move, bishop to b7. I played a3, kicking the knight from b4, and now he played knight c6. Now I played simple move rook d1. So around here, I was very optimistic about my position. It was like, okay, I have pretty much harmonious position, very nice center, and my bishop is going to come to f4, my queen is going to come to c2, and there's going to be a long-term pressure down the c file on this c7 pawn as well. So I was pretty happy with what I was doing. And my opponent played a very nice move here. He played a5. His idea is to go a4 and triple my queenside pawns, and also maybe in the long term, stick a knight on b3, which can be dangerous. So I went with my initial plan. I played queen c2, played a4, and now I played bishop f4. It's funny that so far we're actually following one game between Anatoly Donchenko and Viktor Ivanov in 1999. I wasn't aware of this game, but we're actually following an actual game that has been played more than 25 years ago. So yeah, after bishop f4, I was pretty happy. I was like, I'm going to go rook c1 next, putting some pressure on the c file. I have a very nice center, and definitely my opponent is under some pressure. But he finds a very nice move. He plays knight to a5, sacrificing the pawn on c7. So initially, I was like, wait a minute, isn't that just a free pawn? But then I realized, first of all, if I take with a queen, then the pawn on e4 is going to hang. So I started thinking about taking with a bishop. And I even saw that tactics like bishop takes e4 won't work, because then I will take the queen, bishop takes c2, bishop takes e7, bishop takes d1. And then I simply take the bishop, and I'm going to be up a lot of material. I have like two bishops versus a rook, which is completely winning. So I saw that this line doesn't work for him. And the only move that I was concerned about was queen c8, which is the move that he played in the game. And I saw that from distance, that after queen c8, he's simply threatening to win my bishop. He's trying to go bishop d8 or bishop d6 to win my bishop on c7. And he's going to add this knight b3 move as well. So like, if it's black to play here, black is going to go knight b3 first to stop me from playing any rook c1. So when I go rook b1, then bishop d6 or bishop d8 is going to win some material on c7. So yeah, here my initial idea, which is the move that I played in the game, was to play knight to e1. So with knight e1, I defend my queen on c2, preparing to get this bishop back. And also I overprotect my e4 pawn. So in some lines, we saw that there are issues with this pawn on e4. So now with the bishop on g2, I'm holding on to my e4 pawn as well. But I had one better move. Like knight e1 is the second best move, but I had this move knight d2, which I didn't consider in the game. I basically thought knight e1 was forced, but knight d2 is a very nice move. So the idea with this one is that it completely stops knight to b3. And then if bishop comes here, I can always go rook c1 and defend my bishop on c7, which is much more harmonious than what we had in the game. So apparently black's best here is to go bishop g5 and then bishop f6, trying to hit this pawn on d4. And this position is very complicated. Like, there's also e5, which allows takes and queen b7 with some rook c8 ideas. But objectively, the best is to give the pawn back with queen c3, let him take and take the bishop, and then just claim that after all of that, white has a much more harmonious position with two rooks in the center and a better control over the center as well. So right, I didn't consider knight d2 in the game. I kind of blitzed knight e1 in this position, thinking that it's the only move, which is still fine. White still has a little bit of an edge. He played knight b3, and now I played rook a b1. So the thing is, he plays queen d7, and now he's attacking this pawn on d4, and he's also preparing rook fc8. And the only way I can defend against both is to take on b6. So now I'm up 2 pawns. And something happened here that I thought I'm close to winning. So he played rook fc8 and then bishop a6. So I put my queen on e3. And now he plays rook a b8. So here, from distance, when I played this queen maneuver, queen e2 to queen e3, I was like, okay, I go d5. I go d5, I save 2 pawns. My bishop is going to be well guarded. And my main idea next is to simply go d6. he can't take because of e5. And if he allows the pawn on d6, I can always save my bishop on c7. So playing d5, I was thinking, oh my god, I'm winning. I'm just up 2 pawns with a really good position. But then he plays this shocking move e5, and I was like, wait on a minute. My bishop is in the jail. My bishop on b6 is kind of in the jail, and I couldn't find a good way to save the bishop. Now, all of a sudden, I even started becoming a little bit nervous. I might even lose this game now, because this bishop is really not so easy to save. I was initially thinking even to go f4 and try to like break open the center, try to run these pawns, but he can always sack this rook on b6. I can't take because of bishop c5, losing a queen. So here I started getting a little bit nervous. I was like, oh my god, am I going to lose this game? But after some think, I found the best move, knight to d3. I actually spent like more than 10 minutes here playing knight d3. And my idea was, if he takes my knight, trying to like still trap this bishop on b6, I will take back with a rook, and now d6 is a major threat. So let's say he goes queen to b7. Now I'm actually going to go d6. And once he saves the bishop, I can go bishop c7 and completely save my own, and I'm going to be up 2 pawns. In fact, he can still play bishop d6 and try to like keep this bishop at bay. But that will give me some time to think about even some exchange sacks, going a4, a5 to bolster the bishop, or even some maneuvers with this bishop to f3 or h3 at some point. Like, this position is still like highly complicated. I would say it's still unclear. But I was like, okay, in the worst case, I will sack the exchange and just go a4, a5. And I can't be much worse, for sure. I guess I can't go a4 here, though. What did I see? I don't even remember what I saw. But I was thinking about all sorts of these ideas. Maybe bishop f1 first, and then getting this bishop into the game. I was a little bit worried, I have to be honest. So yeah, he played queen b7, played bishop a7, attacking the rook. He plays rook a8. And here was a very interesting moment in the game. So initially, I was considering this move, knight takes e5. So I'm already up 2 pawns. I was considering taking the 3rd pawn and then giving up this bishop on a7. And this seemed really unclear to me. So if knight e5, he's going to take on a7. I'm going to trade the queens, put the knight on c6. And this position, I would say, it's really unclear. I had this position in mind, thinking on that initial moment. And I was like, I'm not sure. Am I better? Am I worse? Am I winning? Am I losing? Like, I saw this bishop might come to c5, but I saw also I have these strong pawns coming down the board, bishop coming to h3. So I was really not sure how to evaluate this position. In fact, computer thinks it's slightly better for black. But this was something I was really planning to consider. But first, I was like, let's repeat once. Let's repeat once, and once I get to that position, I will think about it. And the big thing was that I saw that if he goes rook cb8, which he did in the game, I have this nice shot d6, sacrificing my d-pawn to deflect the bishop to d6 and now put the bishop on c5. If he had gone for the repetition with rook ab8 and rook a8, I would have probably spent some time calculating knight e5, and I'm not sure what my feeling would have been and what the result of the game would have been. I'm not even sure I would have gone for it. Maybe I would have taken the repetition if I wasn't convinced. But anyways, he went for this line, and this was what I was hoping for. Because now after everything happens, he's going to take on d3. Now you can see the point of deflecting the bishop to d6. I'm going to take on d6. He's going to take on b1. I'm going to take on b8. He's going to take my bishop. I'm going to take his bishop. And I saw this position from distance. And I was like, yes, my opponent has a very nice grip on the queen side. He has a strong knight on b4, which can always jump to the nice outpost on d4. So I was pretty sure that he has enough compensation for the pawn. But if you guys know me, I'm a big fan of being up material. I think it's much harder to play this position with black because you're down a pawn. And it's going to be difficult mentally to play when you're down a pawn. So I was happy to get into this position, even though I felt like black has enough compensation. In fact, computer thinks this is equal. So he played g6, creating some luft for the king. And my bishop on g2 is kind of stuck. I was even considering f4 in some moments to open up the position, but I just felt like my king is going to be way too weak. So I played bishop f1, preparing bishop c4. He blitzed queen c6, stopping my bishop from coming there. And here I found a very nice move. I played the move queen to c3, which was the best objective move as well. So the point is, if he takes on e4 now, I'm going to go rook e1 and kind of winning the pawn back on e5. And if I win the pawn on e5 back, the black's position loses some strength because now the knight is not going to be stable on d4. So I was pretty happy to get this on the board, and here my opponent makes a mistake. He takes on e4 with a queen. What he could have done was actually not so easy. He could have taken my queen, b takes c3, and then rook c8. I suspect my opponent saw that, and he also, I think, saw that after bishop e5, it's going to be a pretty easy draw. After takes, and knight c5, attacking the bishop and the pawn on a3. And after all of that, this position is kind of going to be a dead draw. I mean, it's still some play left, but after bishop d5, he's probably going to go rook a7, guard the 7th rank, and there's not that much left to play for. So I believe what my opponent was scared about was this move c4, which I was also planning to play. The point is, if knight d2 now, attacking all these pieces, I have rook to b4. And now I'm going to be up a pawn, and knight f1, king f1, suddenly a4 pawn is going to hang. But he has this very nice, calm, and cold-blooded move that we both miss, which is rook to d8. And now the knight on b3 shows its power. First of all, with a pawn on c4, my bishop cannot really harass the knight. And this rook combined with this knight really dominate my rook on b1. This rook on b1 is so passive right now. And what my opponent is going to do is to start making annoying moves like rook d4, rook d2, and even rook d2, rook a2 might be an idea. So best I have is actually to sack the pawn back and try to play for activity. And then we're going to get into a dead equal position again. So he could have drawn the game, basically, by finding that resource. I decided to play a more natural move, queen takes e4. I played rook e1, and here he played queen d4 and offered me a draw. So at this moment, I felt like there's a high chance that this position is a draw with correct play. But given my opponent's lower time and also me still being up a pawn, I thought it's better to keep playing and keep pushing for the win. But I went wrong instantly. I took on e5, getting back my pawn. What I should have done was to play queen c7 first. And the idea with queen c7 is to attack the rook on b8, forcing the rook back to a more passive square. Rook e8 is met by bishop c4, attacking this pawn on f7. And after queen c7, after queen c7, if rook goes to f8, now the pawn on e5 is still hanging, but now I get a much better version of what I got in the game. I will take on e5, and after all of these trades, the rook on f8 is much worse placed compared to a rook on b8. So after like the top line that I checked, black goes knight d2, tries to like win this pawn on b2, and in return I will go with the a4 pawn, and we'll get this position where I'm still up a pawn, still probably holdable, but there's a lot left to play for, and of course I'm going to play this position forever. But yeah, I took on e5, he took on c3, and he played this very nice move knight d2, which I initially missed. I didn't miss the whole move, but I missed how powerful it is, because it's threatening knight f3, and it's also threatening rook b1, winning my bishop. So like, I can't really save my rook and the bishop at the same time with a good move. Because also rook b3 is coming and I have to avoid that one. So the best I had was to play rook b5, but now he finds rook c8, attacking my pawn on c3. And the best I have is to give up my last pawn. We trade pieces, and we shake hands. We agree to a draw. No, I didn't agree for a draw. I still kept playing this game. As I told you initially, this game is the longest game that I've ever played. I played rook a5. I was like, I'm still hoping. I'm still just minimally better. It's just a little bit more uncomfortable for my opponent because this rook is stuck defending the a4 pawn. And it's kind of difficult to liberate the rook. Like, in rook endgames, activity is very important. And if he ever moves this rook away, I'm going to win the pawn on a4, and then all of a sudden I'm going to have chances. So he plays king g7, I played king f1, and here he makes a huge mistake, in my opinion. I think this is the decisive mistake of the game. Not the decisive mistake in the sense that he gets into a losing position, but it makes the defensive task much, much harder. He plays king to f6. Very normal looking move, activating the king. But the problem is he should have prioritized not letting my king get active. Rook e4 would have held the game very easily. I think after rook e4, we would have actually shaken hands after 3 or 4 more moves. And the point is, I can't really activate my king. And how can I kick this rook away from e4? Like, I can always go here, but if king f3, f5, like you can even go f5 right here. And then what else can I do? The only other way to kick the rook is to go f3. And if I try doing that, you can always go rook e3, attacking both pawns. And now if I take the a4 pawn, he's going to take my f3 pawn, and this is going to be a very simple draw. So I saw that in the game. I actually saw it when I was here. But then he played king f6, and I was starting to rub my hands thinking, oh my god, I can actually win this game, because now king e2. And all of a sudden, king d3 is coming, and this rook is getting kicked away from defending the a4 pawn. So he played rook c2 check, and I played the best move, king to e1, guarding the pawn on f2. And now I'm threatening to take the pawn on a4. The point is, now if he goes rook c4, I play king to d2. And next move, inevitably, king d3 is going to come, and he can't really hold on to the a4 pawn anymore. So by force, I'm winning a pawn now. So my opponent decided to give up the pawn. He didn't try to like cling on to it till the last second. So he wants to keep my king cut off on the back rank. I took the pawn, and he played king e5. I played h4. He played rook a2, and I played king to f1. So we got this very famous position in the game, which has been like analyzed in the Dvoretsky endgame manual in so much detail. So when I got to this position, I knew for a fact that this position is still a theoretical draw. But I also knew that there's a lot of tries that white can go for, and it's going to be challenging for my opponent to hold this position. So I'm going to very briefly show you how much theory this position has. Like this is the famous position, which is called the Kantorovich position. Let me bring it up. What is going on? Let me reload. Yeah, so this is the position called the Kantorovich position. Very famous position, analyzed in the Dvoretsky endgame manual in so much detail. It's the exact same structure with a passed a pawn on the outside. Of course, if we both keep moving around with the pawns intact, and I get to push my pawn to a6, we're going to get this position, which I was hoping for. And I knew that the best winning try for white is to go king to d4, sacrificing the pawn on f2. And I knew for a fact that if he takes on f2, white is actually going to win with this very nice move, rook c7, getting ready to play a7 next. He's going to put the rook behind the pawn. I'm going to go a7. Now after king f5, the only winning move again is to play king to c4. And the idea is pretty deep, actually. Like, if the king approaches, I'm going to play king to b3 with the idea of rook c4 and rook a4. I'm not going to show, like, all these different rook and pawn versus 3 pawns endgames in detail. I'm just showing some rough ideas of how rich this endgame is. If he goes rook a1, I'm going to go the other way. So, like, king c4's idea is that I'm going to be ready to go either king b3 in case he goes king g4, and king b5 in case he goes rook a1. And now my idea is to go rook c5 check with king b6 and trying to build some sort of bridge. And like, there's so much to discuss. Like, there are a bunch of king and 3 versus rook and pawn, or like rook versus 2 pawns endgames that are won or drawn by tempo. So my point is, even rook takes f2 lines are extremely tricky, and if he knows the best move, which is g5, he's going to be able to hold. Still, I have like countless tries. I can take on g5, I can go king d5, which is actually the most testing try. Like, there's so much analysis going on in this endgame. So I knew that it's not an easy endgame. I knew for a fact that my opponent is not going to have an easy defensive task in hand. And I have a lot of resources to play for the win. And given the fact that my opponent was down to 1 minute, I was actually pretty optimistic at this point. He played f6, I played king g2, king f5. And the problem is my pawn is not on a6 just yet. So my opponent can actually go with a more active defense, like king g4, here I played a very nice and tricky move, rook b5. My opponent was having less than a minute, and here he had to solve a lot of problems. Like, for instance, if he takes on a3, I'm going to sacrifice my pawn and play rook b4 check and win the game. So he played g5, and then I played a4, trying to get this pawn to a5. And the point is now his king is kind of stuck on g4. His rook is stuck defending against this f3 threats. Now after he takes, I give this check on b4, and now I take the pawn on h4. And here I was pretty happy. I was like, I'm making some positive progress in the position. And I knew that it's still probably holding, but I was feeling very positive with my progress. Like, now his pawns are split. I can put this rook on f4 to defend everything. So the game goes on. He goes king g6. I play rook f4. And very slowly, I start to bring my king. And my king gets to d4 in this position. And here he makes a losing blunder. He played the move king to g5. And I think in this position, what he missed was that the rook's activity and attacking these pawns on this side of the board is actually much more important than king's activity. But it's a tough decision to make with 1 minute on the clock. So against rook a2, my idea was to actually sacrifice the pawn on f2 and just go with my king. And initially, I thought this is really good for me. For instance, if he goes rook a2, putting the rook behind the pawn, this is just dead lost. I go king b5. And the point is, even if he sacrifices this rook eventually for the a pawn, my rook on the 4th rank is just going to defend against any threats, any breakthroughs with either a pawn or a king. So this is completely winning. But he could have gone with rook f3, going with a second pawn on g3. And he's going to be just in time. Looks like I'm just in time to promote my pawn, but he's going to give this check, king to b6. Now, not rook c8 again. Like, if rook c8, I'm going to win the game. Because after all of that, we're going to get a winning rook versus f and h pawn endgame. Which, of course, if I want to analyze this one, it's going to take another 5 minutes. But I'm just going to show you a sample line. If black plays in the most tenacious way, trying to shoulder away my king, I'm going to give this nice check. King goes to d4, still trying to shoulder away my king. But then I attack this pawn on f6, forcing the king back. Now my king is going to be just in time to actually come back and defend against the pawns. So like, this is one line. There are a lot of tries that black can go for. And the problem for my opponent is that it's very difficult for him to calculate all of these lines with 1 minute on the clock. In fact, the only drawing move here is to give another check on b3. And now only after king a5, just one more tempo gained by forcing my king to a5, he's going to go rook to b8. And this time, it is actually holding because of that one extra tempo with a king on g5. Like previously, with a king on g6, I think maybe I could have gone for some cutoff options against the king. I'm not even sure, because maybe f5, king g5. But this one tempo, forcing my king back to a5, is actually decisive. And now the game is going to be a draw. Even here, like after king c6, he needs to be accurate. He needs to like shoulder away my king probably. It's pretty complicated to evaluate such positions from distance with 1 minute on your clock. So anyways, my opponent played king g5, which was a losing blunder. Now I played king c5, activating my king. Rook a2 was played, attacking my pawn on f2. And now I play rook f4, defending my pawn like this. So I was pretty happy. I'm going to go king b5 next and start pushing my a pawn. Looks pretty optimistic. But now he plays this nice move h4. I think it's the best practical try. You sack this pawn to get rid of my stronghold on f4, which is defending every pawn. And now a5 was played. Rook goes to a2, and now king b5. And here I was still optimistic that I'm going to win the game. He plays rook a3, and here I had this very interesting moment. So in the game, I saw that a6 is a winning move. And the line I saw was that if he takes on g3, I'm going to go a7. Now, if he goes rook a3, I'm going to go rook a4 and simply win the game. And if he takes on h4, I'm going to promote to a queen. And I knew that this position is a table-based win, but I knew that it's going to be so difficult to win this game. First of all, he's going to put this rook on g4, king on g5, rook on e4, cutting my king, trying to hold some fortress. Then I need to like maneuver around somehow, put him in zugzwang. break the first fortress, get the king closer, outflanked with my king, then put him in Zugzwang again, force the king up, and then try to somehow win this pawn. And finally, I have to win queen versus rook, which is also a tough endgame to win. So I saw this line in the game, and I had like 1 minute on the clock. So I wasn't sure, should I go for it or should I keep the rook endgame? Which one is better? In fact, I actually have a win here, which is much easier than a7. I could have won the game with rook to b4, stopping any sort of checks on the b file. And now the thing is, after rook here, rook a4, king a5, this time, if you get some sort of endgame like this, white is winning by 1 tempo. And the way white wins is that after f4, I'm going to bring the king closer, f3, king comes closer, f2, and now I put my rook on the back rank, defend against this pawn, and my king is just in time to win the game on e2. Of course, seeing all these lines with a minute on the clock and evaluating them correctly is borderline impossible. I actually always wondered how Magnus would deal with such a position, having less than a minute on the clock. I played rook h8, less than a minute on the clock, and I decided to cling on to the g3 pawn. So now if he takes, I'm going to trade the rooks, and the a pawn is going to win the game. So of course he goes king f5, renewing the threat of taking the pawn. Now I play a6. Here I saw that, of course, if he takes, this time this was a pretty trivial win because my king is pretty close on b5. Like, I was sure that this one is easily winning. So this one was not my concern. He plays king e5, and he's trying to bring the king closer to defend against the a pawn. I played king b6, preparing a7. He started giving some checks, and I was kind of repeating to gain some time, and now I start bringing my king closer. Now the point is, if rook b3, I'm going to win the game with king to a4. And then if the rook goes to b1, I'm going to go with rook h5, rook a5, put the rook behind the pawn. So he correctly so decides to push the pawn. And now I took this opportunity to bolster my pawn on g3 because I was always worried of him taking on g3 and then trying to hold rook versus pawn in game, especially with the pawn on f5 now. So he plays king d6. I give this check on g6, king c7. And here I made a huge blunder. So if you guys want to, you can pause the video and try to find the win for white. Imagine you have 1 minute on the clock like I did in the game. Try to find the win for white here. Yes, the win is actually not that difficult. I had to play a7. The thing is, if he takes with a rook, I'm going to go rook g7 check, king b8, takes, and now my king is close to win the pawn on f5. But the point is, he's going to go king b7. And if I go rook g7, we'll transpose to what we got in the game, which I will cover next. But I had this very nice pawn sacrifice, a8 equals queen. And the point is, in both recaptures, either with a rook or with a king, my opponent is going to get into a losing pawn endgame. So if rook takes a8, rook g7 check leads to a pawn endgame, which is winning. I'm going to go rook g8 next and trade the rooks. If king takes a8, I'm going to go rook a6 check, trade the rooks, and now this pawn endgame is winning because my king is going to win the pawn on f5. But in the game, I didn't see this idea to promote the pawn. I gave this check on g7, which was a huge blunder, and then I played a7. And I correctly realized that if he takes, he's going to lose the pawn endgame. My king is closer. But he plays this nice move, king a8, which I also saw, but I thought after king c5, my king is much closer. His king is stuck with this pawn on a7. He can never take. And I'm just going to simply march my king and win the f5 pawn. And I also thought about some rampant rook ideas in the few seconds that I had with f4. I was thinking if I take, now he can think about having a rampant rook, trying to sack this rook and do some stalemate tricks with the king on a8. But then I saw I can give this check on g8 and then take on f4. And with the active king and the f-pawn, this has to be winning, which is actually winning. But he found this very nice move, rook d3, which was like a cold shower for me. I was like, oh my god, now how to break through this cutoff on the d file. So I started shuffling around a little bit again, attacking the rook. He was keeping the blockade like this. I tried king here. I was even thinking to go rook d7 at this point, trying to create some chances like that. But then rook g8, attacking g3 pawn was annoying. And if king b6, he can always go rook g6 check. So yeah, I played king b6. I didn't go for that. I didn't want to let him pressure this pawn just yet. And the thing that happened was that after rook d3, we actually had a threefold repetition in this position. So initially we had this position at the start of the endgame. This is the second repetition, and this is the third repetition. But my opponent didn't claim the draw. He just played the move. So I guess he was just sure that he's going to hold the game and I'm not doing much. I played king c6, he played rook d8, and now I decided to finally go for something new. I played rook g5, attacking the pawn on f5, and my idea was to try and win this pawn and try to press with my extra g pawn. And here he made a huge blunder. He played rook to f8. And his idea was simple. He was like, the pawn a7 is almost dead. And next he's just going to go f4 and get rid of the last pawn on the outside. And after the trade of the f and g pawns, this is going to be a very simple draw. What he should have done was just to go rook d3. Keep pressure on the g3 pawn and at the same time keep the cutoff. So the king is cut off. I can't still do much. And if I take on f5, he's simply going to take on g3. And this is going to be a simple draw. So he played rook f8. Preparing f4, but what he missed was this move king to d6, and now I'm winning again. The point is f4 doesn't work because now I can play king e7, and the rook doesn't have any squares left to defend the f4 pawn. And f3 doesn't work because I simply take the rook, and my rook is just in time to win the f2 pawn. So he took on a7, I played king e7, and I took this pawn on f5. So now we get a rook and pawn versus rook situation. He plays rook g8, I play rook f3. So I'm up a pawn, but the problem is he has this frontal defense against my g pawn. And I'm really struggling to push this pawn further with g4. Plays king b7. So first things first, the most important thing that I need to do in this endgame. I attack the rook and then cut my opponent's king off on the b file. If I let this king get closer, it's going to be a draw. So rook c3 cuts off the king so far away on the b file. That gives me some good winning chances. He goes king b6, and now I start bringing my king. So it looks as though I'm achieving g4, but the problem is once my king gets close to support g4, he's going to start giving all these frontal checks. And again, if the king comes forward, he's going to put this rook on g4. So how can I make progress in this endgame? So what I did was first, I hided my king behind the g pawn. But again, he goes rook g8 and I can't go g4. That's a bit of a problem. So I knew that idea briefly from Dvoretsky that for winning this position, you need to put the rook behind the passed pawn. So I played king f2 first, and after king b5, I played rook c1. So now my rook is ready to go behind the g pawn. Very important. Otherwise, with a pawn on g3 or g4, I can never break a frontal defense because my king can't get enough distance from the pawn. And the rook always comes to g4 to blockade in time. So he goes king b6, but now I start to bring my king. Now it's different, because now when I bring this king, like this, after rook g8, I don't have to go rook to c3. I can go rook g1. So I give away my cutoff on the c file, but in return, I'm threatening to go g4, g5. And we know that if a pawn is past the halfway, even a one file cutoff is going to win the game. I will show you why in the rest of the game. So my opponent starts stopping me from playing g4. I go king to f5, rook g8, and now g4. King gets closer, I go g5, king gets closer, and now, very nice move, cutting the king again, this time on the d file. And this time the difference is, with a pawn on g5, the frontal defense is not working. So once he starts giving these checks, my king is going to get close enough without allowing him to give checks or harass my pawn on g5. So now we transpose into a Lucena position, which is a very common winning position in the rook endgame. My opponent still made me demonstrate that I know the technique. So after some moves, I got this pawn to g7, and now he plays rook to h2. So the problem with this position is that white wants to get this king out, but if I get the king out, he's going to start giving all these checks again, all these checks from behind this time. And my king only shelter is actually the g8 square, which blocks my pawn, so I can't promote. So the way you win this position is to play rook to e4, building a bridge on the 4th rank. The way it works is that after black makes a move, now I start bringing the king, rook f2 check, king g6, rook g2 check, king f6. And now if my opponent keeps giving checks, now I play king g5 and rook g2 check is met by rook g4. And this is the bridge that I'm talking about, and the pawn on the g file is going to promote. So my opponent tried rook g1, but now I played this nice move, rook to f4. No more checks on the f file, and king f7 is coming with g8 queen next, and I'm going to have an extra rook in the end to win the game. So in this position, my opponent, after 117 moves and more than 5 hours of play, resigned the game. Such a delightful victory against my childhood rival, and also such a long game, such a hard-fought game. When you win games like this, when you win games like this, it just feels so great. When you work hard for 5 hours to win a game and you actually get it in the end, it just seems much more enjoyable than a win that you get in an hour or two, or just out of an opening preparation. Such a hard-fought win, and such an interesting game. You know, like I always say, games like this against a childhood rival, against an Iranian friend, which you had rivalry for a long time, and then all of a sudden you come to another tournament, you face each other, 2 out of 2 top boards. These games really seem like a derby, you know, like these games seems like those big games where you want to give it your all, where you want to like put your 100% into the game and win it. And this game actually did not disappoint as a derby. It had everything. It had complex middle games, imbalances, 2 pawns with a bishop on the jail, tactical shots with d6, with bishop takes c7, queen c8, knight e1. Like, it had so much endgame play, and it literally had absolutely everything. It even had controversy. I remember after the game, my opponent was claiming that can he actually claim the threefold now that the game has ended? But the arbiter said that based on the rules, you can't. And then there was discussions that maybe the arbiter should have claimed it because it was the only game left in the playing hall. And, you know, like, it literally felt like a derby, this game. Like, it had everything. And there was, like, so much emotions in this game. At the end, of course, I was feeling delighted, but I was also feeling sad for my opponent. He's of course a great friend of mine. Like, I know how hard it feels to lose such a game after a long fight, 117 moves. But anyways, I will definitely take that win, and I think it was a well-deserved win. And what this game showed me was I need to fight until the end. Like, many people might have shaken hands in this position. Previously, when we got, let's say, this position, I could have offered a draw. It's a completely symmetrical rook endgame, and no one is going to criticize me for offering a draw here, but I still decided to play a little bit more, ask my opponent to solve those last little problems, which he actually failed to do so, and and actually it's funny, after 77 more moves played from this position, I managed to finally force resignation out of my opponent. Big, big win. I was delighted. I moved to 3 out of 3, gaining a lot of rating from this game as well, almost 10 points. And in the next round, I'm going to face against an international master, a young and talented international master. And that game also has its own stories and interesting moments. So please stay tuned for the next games. Let me know your comments about this game in the comment section down below. Let me know, how did you like this game? The longest game that I've played in recent memory. Thank you so much for all the support. Hope you guys enjoyed this game. This is, I think, maybe my richest game that I've actually covered on my channel. So hope you guys really enjoy it. And see you guys soon with round 4 recap against the International Master. See you guys soon. Have a great one, and goodbye.